Okay. So this is the second public sector webinar in the webinar series. So we have an ongoing webinar series for those of you who didn't join last time, and that'll be going till around March or so of next year, excluding January, because of course everyone will be away for Christmas and the New Year, and that's the first Thursday of every month. This webinar will cover funding opportunities in the public sector, and we've looped in Paul Bull from EECA and Jaclyn Smith from DETA Consulting. Paul is an account director at EECA, and he manages the $200 million Decarbonisation Fund, as well as multiple other funds at EECA. And he'll cover the different funds and what they mean for the public sector and that kind of thing. I'll let him take things off. I'm in charge of his slides today, so I'll flick through as he speaks, just because he's in Invercargill and has a bit of a poor internet connection. So, but I'll let you go. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kenzie. So thanks for the intro. So my role at EECA is managing EECA's engagement across the state sector and public sector, including local government. If we could just jump to the next slide, please. Yeah, responsible for delivering EECA's outcome in the market. So if you could just hit enter, thanks. And key strategic areas of focus that my role and my team's role fit into are the two highlighted there, so government leadership and effective and low emission transport. So, trying to mobilise New Zealanders to be world leaders in clean and clever energy use. If we could jump to the next slide, thanks. So why is government leadership important to EECA? The state sector matters. It's 3% of New Zealand's total energy use, 2.5% of energy-related emissions. Public sector's got 26,000 vehicles, and there's lots of opportunities to save energy and have good cost savings out of that. And then tied into that is the potential to influence a wider range of sectors by showing leadership. If we could jump to the next slide. This graph's a few years old, and we've just recently launched a revised version of the energy end-use database, but this data was taken from a previous slide, which I think is a good starting point to look at why or how that breakdown of energy emissions in the sector plays out. Obviously largely skewed towards the hospitals being big energy users on a daily basis. Schools makes up a next chunk, and that's why I'm down in Invercargill at the moment, out visiting schools as part of the coal boiler replacement program under the State Sector Decarbonisation Fund, which is exciting to actually get out and look at some of those schools with opportunities to replace those boilers that are at end of life. We've seen some good steps from a couple of the tertiary institutions already through the Decarbonisation Fund, and I'll cover that off in a few slides' time. And then we start to progress further down, and you can see the impact of the 26,000 vehicles on the top of each of those bars in terms of the emissions impact it's having across the sector. Jumping on to the next slide. So EECA and I guess in fact wider industry has a few levers to pull. One of EECA's traditional methods is co-investing in helping people make the right decision to look at energy efficiency and swapping out newer technologies and renewable sources of energy. About this time last year, the government announced $12.1 million worth, $1 billion worth of infrastructure upgrades, and within that was a $200 million fund for decarbonisation of the state sector, with the idea being to bring forward those replacement of key carbon generating assets with more renewable sources. It's probably fair to say there's lots of enterprises interested in how they can get into that game. I met last week with the Westpac government banking team, or the head from that team, saying how can Westpac help with the decarbonisation. A number of government agencies would say borrowing outside of budget is hard, but some agencies have been able to break through that barrier. And the likes of Westpac and in fact most of the banks are pretty keen to see what they can do in terms of sustainable loans or green bonds across the market, and using that as a lever to help decarbonise. There's obviously the Green Investment Fund, which the government set up, which pretty sure state sector is excluded from, but local government is eligible for there. And I think the first loan that the Green Investment Fund issued was to the Wellington Port Company, which has got local government ownership in that entity. Most of the major electricity retailers are also very interested in how they can support investment decisions for decarbonisation. There seems to be a lot of appetite, particularly around the electrification, but not necessarily limited to that. And I find in conversations with customers and my team's conversations with customers that that can be quite a good funding source or opportunity for discussion as to
Paul, I think you've frozen.
Fund and a few more slides. One of our other levers is motivating people. A couple of weekends ago, we relaunched our Gen Less campaign, which is obviously the picture on the first slide. Relaunching that, saying no to wasted energy. We'll see a lot more activity coming through from EECA over the next few weeks and few months as we pull good stories together to show ways of motivating people to use their energy a bit more cleverly, as the ad campaign says, saying no to wasting energy. And then regulation is obviously the other lever that is a way of putting change into place. We've run a very good standards and regulations program across whiteware and appliances for many years, starting to look at some of the commercial applications and putting minimum energy performance standards in place. And there was exciting news last week with the government property group saying that from the 1st of January next year, all leases will, over a certain square meterage, will require a NABERS rating, which will obviously drive improvement in the energy performance of commercial buildings where there's a government tenancy in there. So good examples of regulation helping to improve the industry. We could jump to the next slide, thanks. So the State Sector Decarbonisation Fund is certainly a good opportunity for funding to help decarbonise assets within the government estate. The fund, unfortunately, is not open to local government, clearly been excluded from that funding stream when the Minister of Finance and Minister of Climate Change put together the outline of how the fund will work. We've been given a very clear steer, particularly from Minister of Climate Change, that he wants to see a wide range of projects and not just coal boiler replacements. And in the 3 tranches we've had to date, I think we're starting to see that wide cross range of projects. So we've had some lighting projects We've had some chiller replacements, gas boiler replacement. Certainly there's been some some coal boiler replacements in that program. And there was, in the previous tranche, vehicle replacement with inland revenue, which has certainly generated a lot of interest from many agencies, and the team, myself, have been very busy trying to talk through how that works for them and what an application looks like. We've got close-off date for the next round on the 16th of November, which doesn't seem very far away. And so we've set a date for the one after to allow people that can't quite make that date of the 5th of February. And then we'll look to run one in mid to late March as well. We've already got 4 or 5 applications for the next tranche, and they are predominantly vehicles. Funding is looking to bridge that gap between the traditional cost of internal combustion engine and the battery electric equivalent. And so for most organisations, excluding a small portion of some of the challenges with the charging infrastructure, the cost of the vehicle is certainly covered by the Decarbonisation Fund to bridge that gap, which I guess is what I'm seeing is reflective in the number of applications and the number of vehicles being asked for in the upcoming round. I'm so happy to have any one-on-one conversations around how that might work for your specific organisation and what the things that might need to happen to make that happen. If we could jump through to the next slide, please. So in our guidelines, we're saying projects to be fully implemented by 2022, 2023. If you were to look at the details of the fund, it talks about it, the fund being wrapped up by 2023, 2024, recognised with some of these big projects. I think the largest project that's actually attracted funding so far was a $15 million boiler replacement project. Project creep does happen, and there's obviously a reporting requirement back to government to show the carbon benefits that this program is going to deliver and will deliver. And as it says at the bottom, there's the close-off dates for the next few tranches. Good jump. Yeah. So EECA's got a number of support programs to help people work through what that replacement of fossil fuel burning assets might look like. And this slide here talks about EECA's traditional funding. All of those are in play, and the 2 in red are to that particularly help in looking at the assets and what an alternate option might be. ETA, or Energy Transition Accelerator, is a relatively new program that EECA's put into place. We've run a pilot and then expanded the program through from a pilot in recent times. I've also got crowd loans mentioned on that page, and we have just recently adjusted down the administration fee on that to being 1% of the cost of the loan, and it is an interest-free loan. We can jump to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit more about the Energy Transition Accelerator. It is, as the slide says, designed to help large businesses make technical, economically viable decisions. It is a strategic document. It's that long-term planning. It's looking at asset replacement as assets need to be replaced and looking at those timelines. We can jump to the next slide, please. And so how would that typically look from EECA's perspective? We would look to have engagement at a senior level in any organisation because it is a strategic document, And while the team on the ground are often excited about it and just want to crack into getting this roadmap done, we need to have buy-in from senior people in the organisation, because they are the ones that are actually going to approve the funding for the changes or replacement of assets over time, given the large dollar value. So it's important they understand what the process is, what the outcomes are, so that when the opportunities assessment report's completed, that they're on board with changes and can start helping the team plan for those changes from a budgetary perspective. And in terms of implementation, looking at the third box along, causes lots of consternation and debate inside EECA around whether technology change or energy efficiency comes first, and it very much is a customer specific outcome, because in some cases the technology change is the driver for the energy efficiency action across the campus or the site. In other instances, you need to do energy efficiency first to make sure that you get the right size kit and that new technology. And then further down the stream is the fuel switching opportunities. And then there's the traditional EECA funding sitting across the bottom. And so there's a whole lot of outcomes that the program will drive. We could jump to the next slide. Thanks. So as we've developed the program, we recently put a program partner panel in place, and Jeff from DETA is obviously talking after me, and DETA are one of the 10 panelists there. I think we've completed about 10 ETAs to this point in time across both public and private sector, but looking specifically in the public sector, we've had 2 DHBs have completed reports. One university has just received their draft report. A district health board had their kick-off meeting yesterday, and we've got another district health board started up, and we're just signed up, and we're just trying to confirm a start date for that kick-off meeting and the investigation to get underway. And of those 5 in the sector, they've been completed by 4 different program partners. From EECA's perspective, it's always a conversation with the organisation getting the report done as to who on the panel have they got an existing relationship with that understands their enterprise, their campus, how their entity operates, because often those insights that they've already gained over the many years they've been working with them are a good starting point to helping deliver the roadmap for change into the future. Looking in the private sector or business, I think they're targeting somewhere between 15 and 20 Energy Transition Accelerator opportunity assessment reports this year. And that fits in with a program that we're about to launch in the private sector to help bring forward some of that decarbonisation opportunity as well. We could jump to the next slide, please. And so this is what a typical output might look like, and this is just a very small cut down opportunity. And as I said before, the technology change versus efficiency or optimization on site very much becomes a site specific. So in this example, it talks about a heat recovery, new technology, doing some optimization, and you'll see what the savings impact is in the red in the top part, and it shows what the reduction then becomes in the carbon associated with that. And then in the bottom part of the graph, it talks about the fuel switching opportunities. So for this example, there are 3 choices this client could make as a potential option, and each of those has a different impact in terms of the amount of emissions reduction that the fuel type might have. The financial evaluation would have a levelised cost of energy over the life of the asset. We could quickly jump to the next slide. Is a snapshot from District Health Board that has recently had their report. Some of you may have seen this before from a couple of other presentations that have been floating around. So this is a real opportunity for them to work through. You'll see it's got some dates for when those assets might be able to be swapped out, and they have some choices along the way. Jump to the next, thanks. Underpinning that, energy audits are a good opportunity for identifying where those opportunities might lie, both in terms of where energy isn't being used as efficiently as it could, but also looking at some of those bigger energy using assets on site, and I'm starting to work through that process. It's a good opportunity on that first step towards reducing energy and the associated carbon with it. As the slide says, 5 recent District Health Board audits had 5% energy savings with less than a 2-year payback, and 12% energy savings overall from the audit. Indicatively, an audit should cost around 3% of the energy bill for the site that's been audited. Move to the next. And so one of the other quick wins aside from an audit is looking at just getting in and optimising how the energy is being used on site, and that doesn't matter whether it's a commercial building or some sort of manufacturing type plant. It's actually about looking at the process and how to improve it. And so there's a few examples there in terms of areas that might be looked at to drive tuning or systems optimization opportunities. Could we jump to the next slide, please? And so for larger organisations, we also support energy graduates, very much as a size of an organisation specific. In simple terms, if EECA is providing support funding, then we're looking for energy savings back. And so then the organisation needs to be large enough to be able to generate the savings opportunities to support an energy graduate. We've increased our level of funding support in the sector to enable more graduates to be put in place. So we've increased that up to 75% of the cost of salary with a cap across the 2-year program, which has seen a number of universities and district health boards take up the opportunity to put an energy graduate in to help support their teams drive energy efficiency and carbon reduction opportunities. We are starting to see a wee bit of a trend for organisations that haven't had an energy graduate before, as they work through that Energy Transition Accelerator program. It identifies a whole lot of opportunities for them, and they see the real benefit in having an energy graduate on board. So I think we're starting to see quite an early correlation between someone doing an ETA and then quickly signing up for an energy graduate through that funding program from us. You can jump through to the next one, thanks. That's my contact details. If anyone needs to get hold of me, happy to redirect on to one of my team as needs be, depending on location. That was all I was going to cover off from a presentation point of view. Kenzie, I guess it's questions at the end once Jeff's done presentation if there's time.
Yeah, perfect. So Thanks, Paul. That was really great information, and I'll share the slides with everyone, and I'll just intro Jeff and also just highlight quickly. We can cover off questions at the end, but if you have questions, just pop them in the question box throughout the presentation, and then we can do our best to cover off at the end. And then also to highlight Jaclyn's question on how this ties into Toitū's certification programs. We directly look at reduction opportunities for our clients, which would tie into EECA's funding opportunities. And DETA specializes in systems operations. So that's where DETA would come in terms of funding opportunities and how they tie in there. So Jeff Smith is a director of DETA and has worked across almost all sectors, including working with the Sustainable Business Council for guidance for government on accelerating New Zealand's decarbonisation. So I'll let Jeff cover off and we'll chat at the end.
Cool. Thanks, Kenzie. Can you all hear me? Yep. I can assume you can hear me. All right, we'll just roll with it.
Yep, we can hear you.
Cool. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all today. Look, I'm going to, I guess, try and be a little more practical in terms of what's going on and with a few examples. Before I do, let me just tell you a quick little bit about what DETA do and who we are. Look, we're a bunch of 20-something people. Our role is really around optimising and delivering low carbon outcomes for a wide range of customers across industry, across sectors. We work with heaps of different people, but I guess in the public sector, we work across DHBs, ministries, corrections and education, councils, and both in New Zealand and across the Pacific as well, which is a little bit different, as you can appreciate. What do we do? The strategy piece, the what are we going to do? We do the how are we going to do it, building a business case, and I guess the feasibility studies and bits and pieces Paul talked about as well. We do it, project delivery, we make the stuff happen. And the piece that's missing there, I guess, is the proof, the verify, just making sure that what we said was going to happen or someone said was going to happen was actually achieved as an outcome, which is a significant part of I guess, any of these projects. We've got offices across the country in Melbourne, and we've got live work across Australasia generally. But before I dive in, look, there's a little bit of replication here, so I'll try and be quick so we can leave some room for questions. Before we do, I kind of just want to come back to this whole climate emergency piece and where that fits within the strategy and leadership perspective. And lots of talk around climate emergency, and there still hasn't been a huge amount of climate action. So although we have people in the streets saying things like this, we have agencies not dissimilar to yours who are not necessarily following on with this climate emergency tact. This is from a council presentation I did not so long ago, but look, essentially, yeah, there's a lot of inconsistency and a lot of talk, but still not a lot of action. And I guess to your point, some way, Jaclyn, when you asked that question earlier, we cannot plant our way out of this emergency, so offsetting will not get us to where we need to get to. Offsetting is going to be a part of New Zealand's long-term carbon future. We have challenges around agriculture, which I don't want to talk about here, but I hope you all have some knowledge of, which is going to require some ongoing offsetting through planting. But the way we will deal with carbon long term is reducing it, so mitigating it, getting rid of it from our operations, from our supply chains, so that we can be a zero carbon New Zealand by 2050, which is only 29 years away, soon to be 28. So it's a relatively short time frame. So Paul's talked to you a lot around the Decarbonisation Roadmap, and you can call it an ETA, you can call it a roadmap, it kind of doesn't really matter, but what it is this coordinated plan. And so you've heard a lot about that, but it's really the, what do we look like in 2050? What are we aiming for? And what is the path to achieving that? So before I give you an example of what that looks like, I think the first part of any of this stuff, and Paul mentioned it, is around engaging at a higher level and making sure that the people who are influential in your business or your industry or your ministry, whatever it might be, are fully supportive and on board with whatever engagement you are having from a lower carbon, zero carbon perspective moving forward. And so that means broad engagement. The thing I think you have to remember is that your influence is significantly wider than just your operation, just your business. I talked earlier about the citizens and customers' actions and behaviour. You are every day you are influencing their output, their actions, and you're also influencing the engagement of and the outcomes of your partners within the businesses that you operate. I think that's really important to understand here. So a lot of the stuff around roadmaps is very inward looking, but the outcomes are far larger and wider than that. Look, there's been some pretty good starts. Paul mentioned around district health boards. There's been some pretty good outcomes at DHBs already. The Toitū Awards last year were, I think, dominated by Auckland DHB and Counties Manukau DHB, and I'll speak about some work we've done at counties a little later on, which is cool and great to get that recognition. But I think one of the things that we've seen really works is having champions in these businesses, and it's great to have champions at a high level, and that's where you need to have that engagement anyway. But you've got to have them all the way through your business, because without champions, it's really hard to get traction, and it's really hard to build culture towards the zero carbon NZ. And I think, again, the time is now. Look, I've been playing in the sector for the last sort of 10 years, and there has never been the focus, the appetite, the knowledge to make this transition. And we are seeing the likes of EECA becoming more empowered with $200 million worth of funding in the public sector and additional funding in the private sector. That is only going to grow. And so now is the time to be bold, think big, and make those transitions, because the opportunities are there. Paul showed you some images of what a roadmap looks like. I've got a couple of different ways of presenting it, but it's pretty much the same. Around, you start on the left, you've got projects which take your way down to the right. Yeah, I guess reasonably straightforward. There's lots of ways you can present how these roadmaps go, but you'll essentially have timeframes saying, look, first couple of years we'll do those easy things, and then later on we'll get into the hard ones. And the reason typically you wait is a lot of those hard ones have a pretty crappy economic case, and as things sit, and often these projects are hampered by economics. We often use a thing called a MAC, a marginal abatement cost curve, which essentially shows the economics of projects based on a carbon price. And so you can see with this particular MAC there, on the far left there, at a negative carbon price, that project makes sense. So essentially we should do it now. We should have done it yesterday. There's a bunch of projects, sort of that thin band, sort of from 300 to 1200 tons of abatement, which makes sense at low carbon prices. And if you follow the carbon market, it's currently $35 a ton. So they are well under the carbon price. We should do that now. But as you move forward, you start to see that the carbon price probably isn't high enough to justify some of those more significant projects. So what this does do is provide you a really clear path to say, hey, look, this is the price point when we invest in that project. And it might be a timing issue around, oh yeah, it's going to be in 2025, 26, or it might be when the carbon price reaches X. So again, there's different drives here. Look, as far as roadmaps go, like Paul said, there's been 10 odd done. We've been involved in 7 now through the process, the ETA process. One I can share with you is about the Alliance Group, so not public sector. This is a private operation who is a meat processor. We've worked with them for a long, long time, and I guess we've done a low carbon roadmap, but they've been working on decarbonisation for a long, long time. And this is one of their charts, but you can sort of see on the left there, in the year 2000, they were emitting 150,000 tonnes of carbon. Through the work that collectively we have done, we have reduced that to 100,000 tonnes. And that's through tweaking, tuning, getting operations right, making the right investment decisions at the right time. And so they've essentially, over that period, reduced their carbon exposure by a third. So very significant. And I'm going to touch a little later on around when you should do these things, but I mean, the fact that Alliance have focused on this for such a long period of time means they are in a fantastic position now to invest in conversions to a low carbon fuel, because they are running as efficiently or more efficiently than they could have been otherwise. So what does it look like? Well, Alliance are now investing in some new tech. So with the roadmap, it's sort of identified, here's what they can do, and they've picked that up and run with it. So they've put in a New Zealand, it's not quite a New Zealand first, I think this is the 4th heat pump that went into the country, but it's a heat pump to electrify a diesel burning site. Paul and his team at EECA were involved from a funding perspective. They supported the project and helped get it over the line from a business case perspective. But now this particular site is essentially carbon free from an energy perspective. So technology has enabled this site to decarbonise. So that's kind of leadership piece, right? So from the top, and then I guess from the decarb roadmap, there's a couple of things here. So the first thing that we would suggest that business do is change the way we do things. So let's look at the way we operate, and let's look at ways of doing that in a lower carbon manner. So I guess from a state sector perspective, it's about longer term planning. And I guess there's got to be a segregation away from that political 3-year term. I think bottom right, it wouldn't have mattered if Judith Collins was our Prime Minister currently. You'd still be seeing Ashley Bloomfield front and centre for the COVID sessions. I think a lot of this carbon discussion has to be approached in a similar way, where we remove the political issue. The Zero Carbon Act was supported unanimously across the House, apart from one party who we won't talk about here. But yeah, broadly, everyone's on board. Infrastructure support. There is a lot of money being invested right now, likely in your ministries and councils and further afield, from the government to keep people employed and to stimulate spending. Now is the time to make the right decisions about where the investment goes, because a lot of these infrastructure investments are longer term than 2050. And like I said earlier on, it's about culture. So leading by example is super important here in getting the internal stuff right, getting the reviews right, making sure that carbon is included in all decision making across the business is super important to make sure you get the best outcome for your business. I talked about champions, but that behaviour piece is super important. So the engagement and behaviour with the broader team is massively important as well. You won't be able to get anywhere if you don't have this as part of your culture. I want to talk about the Christchurch City Council. So that's a program they've had for a long period of time called Target Sustainability, which again, I think was an EECA supported program. Paul can correct me if I'm wrong. But it's really around the council trying to think more broadly and improve that influence piece, that engagement piece. So the council funded people like us to go and help businesses around the region to be more efficient. They saw it as part of their corporate responsibility, I guess, in some ways, if you want to call it that. But there is a benefit to council in this case, because for every tonne of waste that we can help a business to divert from landfill, there is a saving to council. So there is actually a benefit here. Lots of energy reduction, lots of carbon reduction, and some pretty cool projects came out of this as well. I can talk to you shortly about the Hamlet Springs project. But again, these sort of engagements are super important to get that wider conversation going. The problem is that lots of the stuff involves getting your hands dirty, and I have spent my fair share of time sifting through skips to figure out how much can be diverted. So great outcomes, but requires some mahi to get there. Cool. Okay, so we've changed the way we do things. We've addressed some of those culture bits and pieces. Let's look at our carbon output. So if you think back to the Alliance example here, it all starts with efficiency. So do some more, treat it like a long-term play. Anybody today, you can achieve 10% saving with some reasonably quick wins. We do energy audits all the time. I was at we're currently working at some schools. There's a huge amount of improvement that can be made in that sector. 10% quite straightforward, 30% with a long-term effort. And if you invest up front with the efficiency piece, we're going to talk fuel switching in a minute, making that significant investment if it's required. And if you're using less, your fuel switching cost will be significantly lower. So you can make some capital savings through having a cohesive strategy. I want to talk to you about Counties Manukau. We've been involved with Counties Manukau DHB for quite some time. One of our consultants, Mark Davis, was the energy manager at site, and so he was involved extensively with their program, but they focused on one asset to see if they can make that work really, really well, and they focused on the super clinic in Manukau. And they saved hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I guess 200,000, that's hundreds, $200,000 of savings with less than a 12-month payback. And that was using a process called continuous commissioning. Continuous commissioning is essentially tweaking a building control system to the point where it's running really, really, really well as can be expected, and then holding it there. So many times you'll go through a process with a consultant or a contractor, get them in, make the changes, and they'll go away again. And when they go away again, everything kind of goes back to how it was. Not immediately, but if you make some changes to set points and settings and those sort of things, over time, they creep back up again. So continuous commissioning is having a process around maintaining that for the long term. And that's what Mark was able to do at Counties Manukau. And that's what Counties Manukau are doing now to ensure that the energy savings that were made are locked in for the long term. Again, lower investment up front, more savings later on. And third one is the energy source piece. So we've got our energy, we've got our culture right, everyone loves this stuff. We've got our energy demand right down. We've been working really hard on getting our energy down across our sites. Now change our energy source. So we're like, oh, now we've got to take that investment. We've got to go to Paul and say, hey, Paul, can we have some money, please, to help convert our boiler heating plant, whatever it might be, to something low carbon. And there's lots of options you've got in front of you. So people are investing in heat pumps. Heat pumps currently can make up to 85 degrees comfortably. There are heat pumps under development that'll be able to make steam. So and the benefit of a heat pump versus an electric boiler is you have this coefficient of performance. So for it's like a heat pump at home. Every 1 unit of energy in, you get somewhere between 3 and 8 out. With an electric boiler, it's 1 to 1. So again, the efficiency is much better. Biomass boilers, there's lots of wood boilers going in currently to schools around the country as a straight coal replacement. Same for district health boards. I'm based in Christchurch. The central hospital here is putting in a wood boiler. It's a really easy thing to decarbonise, to essentially lump in a pretty easy solution. Waste to energy, we're involved in a few areas where it's not burning plastics or anything like that. It's more about, hey, is there a solid waste stream for a council? What can we do with solid waste? Can we burn that? Can we digest that? What can we do to maximise the utilisation of that waste? Geothermal, people are talking about drilling holes and sucking heat out. Great for some locations, not good for others. But again, certainly worth considering if you're in one of those areas where there is a geothermal resource. But I think there's a huge potential for energy hubs. There are so many businesses who are nearby to each other, and we're talking capital investment here. How can we minimise capital investment, minimise longer term energy consumption and infrastructure to achieve benefits for a wider range of businesses or sectors? A couple of examples I'm going to share with you around kind of where we're working. One is the Ministry of Education. We are currently running an efficiency program, so we're doing audits for 60 odd schools across the country, which is the first time that this has been done at that scale. This is really around that efficiency piece. Let's get the load down as far as possible. The ministry knows for lots of these schools they're going to have to convert to wood or electricity as a conversion piece. How can they do that most cost effectively? So can we make sure the schools are operating as they should be? And I guess, where does that carbon piece fit in? For a school that's already using electricity only, there's some efficiency pieces and some cost savings. The carbon savings are reasonably minor compared with a school who's going to convert from a coal boiler to a wood boiler. But one of the things I did pick up here, and going back to that leadership piece, on the website for MOE, we talk about energy efficiency design at schools. So it doesn't necessarily say this is what you have to do. This is a bit of guidance about what we want to do. And I guess my question to you and when it comes back to leadership, is this strong enough? How can we dictate this sort of stuff? How can you as policymakers, as decision makers, ensure that this stuff occurs rather than getting caught up around, value engineered out and those sort of things? Again, building a new school, it's a 50+ year asset. It's going to still be here post 2050. And I guess just something a little bit different. We've worked closely with Hamner Springs for a long period of time, and at Hamner Springs they have they flare gas, or used to flare gas. When they pull water out, all the heating for the pools comes from geothermal water. There was some gas in there which was flammable, and we developed a project in conjunction with the pools. It was certainly a team effort. They were the guys who have had the idea for a long time. We developed a project to take the gas and combust it and make some energy out of it. Again, sponsored by EECA, which is pretty cool. But if you can see the wee video, what we were involved with is some little pieces of equipment which sat in a magical plant room here. But what this allows them to do is reduce their electricity consumption by 20%, significantly reduce their carbon footprint because they aren't letting methane off into the atmosphere anymore. And C is get some free heat. So this unit will also generate heat as well as electricity. So that won an innovation award in 2018. So that's my think big, think outside the box play. So when we at the start I talked about being bold. In this case, Hamner were being bold. First in the country application for technology like this. So to close it up, do you have a decarb plan? Well, we think you need one. Paul thinks you need one. I think Toitū hopefully think you need one too. 5 key things. Set a goal. What are you doing it for? Reduce emissions. So get your load down. Lead by example. Get that culture right. Provide clear paths for your community. You guys are acting in a wide community. People are making decisions based on what you're doing. Be clear with what you're going to be doing going forward. And I think I'll end with be strong, be bold. Cool. Thank you for your time. I'll hand back over to Kenzie to run some questions, I guess.
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. Jeff, there was a question in there for, can you expand a bit on the ways in which our organizations are influencing our partners and stakeholders from a decarbonization perspective?
Yeah, sure. Can I talk about councils as one particular example?
Yeah, sure.
So I mean, I think that's really relevant, and I think there are some people from councils on the line here. So councils are making decisions every day around public transportation. They're making about public assets, and how we have people into those assets and where they're locating them. How can we minimise transport time for those people? I think there's lots of decisions which occur throughout the development of assets and the implementation of them that have an impact on a local area. But the other thing is a supply chain. So we haven't really talked. I guess the conversation today has been sort of driven towards your own emissions, but we're all part of a supply chain. We're working with logistics companies, trucking companies now who wouldn't have done anything on their own, but they have had their customers saying, look, if you don't do something in this space, we're not going to deal with you anymore. There are councils now who have got procurement policies saying you have to have sustainability as part of what you do. So there are people taking a stand, but we need everybody to take a stand so that the pressure comes on the entire sector rather than leaving it up to a few leaders in that space.
If I could add to that, I think another really good example is the work that Christchurch City Council and Canterbury GHB did around their pool vehicles. So they did a deal with Zilch, and there's fully electric vehicles available as part of the booking system in both those organisations, but there are also cars available to the general public to book, and so that rolls into staff starting to use it. And if, picking up on Jeff's mantra, be bold. There's a couple of shared services government buildings within Easy facility. It'd be great to see them using a car sharing scheme rather than each agency having their own vehicle in them.
Yeah, and I didn't talk about cars specifically, but the whole mantra around use less first applies for cars too. Like, I think EECA, Paul, you've done some work around fleets and how often the vehicles are actually used, and quite often a fleet vehicle sits there all day and doesn't really do anything apart from going to and from work for whoever happens to be assigned the vehicle. So, do you really need that vehicle in your fleet? How many do you really need to undertake the operations you need to undertake?
Absolutely. And just a follow-up question from Roger, who asked the same question as before. Is there a repository of good news stories of decarbonization in the public sector? I can kind of cover off that one, as I'm sure you guys can as well. In terms of Toitū, we do public disclosure agreements as well as case studies with our clients. Not all of our clients for case studies, but for specific cases of really great decarbonization, we'll do a case study or business case on them. And then DETA and EECA can add to those in terms of success stories they've seen as well.
There was a question on the Q&A around, do you think increasing energy prices will influence consumer behaviour and encourage them to save more energy? I think the answer to that is of course. So there's no way that increasing pricing is not going to have an impact. And like I said, you still have to have some level of economic input to these projects. It's very rare that a project goes ahead without a positive economic solution. If you recall back to the chart I had, which was the MAC curve, and they sort of had at different points, things start to make sense. I mean, you could have the curve for electricity pricing at the same time. All of a sudden, those projects will make a lot of sense. I guess the question is, what are energy prices going to do in the future? And there's a lot of uncertainty right now around what the price of, I guess, electricity is going to do because of TY exiting, what the price of biomass is going to do because there's a huge demand coming forward on that. And yeah, I guess, yeah, and when I say electricity, there's TY, but there's also the gas market, which is that drives some of our pricing volatility as well. So we're at a really interesting point from a pricing perspective.
Cool. And then we probably have time for one quick question. So there's a lot of great examples of infrastructure hardware change. Are there any NZ example user cases that furnish similar carbon advantages using 14.0 tech? Is there any focus on that kind of tech?
That's Industry 4.0.
Okay.
Paul, do you want to talk to that?
I'm not sure I understand that Industry 4.0.
Oh, so I think it's more around using tech solutions rather than being infrastructure solutions. So to your point, Rob, it might be things like, instead of replacing a boiler, are there solutions around using apps to be, I guess, drive efficiencies? My point would be, I think there are, and it would probably be more on the behavioural change side of things rather than on the physical transition side of things. I haven't seen. I think there's a program out at the moment, or an app out at the moment, that you can engage your staff on, and it sort of becomes a bit of a carbon competition. And so I think that there's things like that which may be having an impact, but I haven't seen anything anything stronger than that.
Cool. Well, I think that's probably all the time we have for questions today. Thank you so much, Paul and Jeff, for joining us and giving us all that great information. For everyone who